today has shown the world that the conflict has reached a completely new level of destruction. It all started with a harsh statement by Vladimir Putin, which sounded like a bolt from the blue. The Russian president said that the targets for testing the latest missile systems will be determined based on the level of threat to Russian security. He emphasized that Russia considers itself entitled to strike military targets in countries that allow their weapons to be used against Russian targets. In the event of an escalation of hostile actions, retaliatory measures will be decisive and adequate in force. Putin called on the leaders of states planning to use their military units against Russia to seriously consider the consequences. These words were perceived as a dire warning not only to Ukraine, but also to the entire NATO bloc, which actively supports military operations near the Russian borders. On August 26, 2025, a real catastrophe broke out in the mountains of Carpathian near Uzhhorod. An ordinary-looking night enveloped the village of Veliki Berezny, like dozens of other settlements in this region. But hidden in the mountain mass was a secret facility, which only select specialists knew about. It was the most important underground corridor of the transport network, designed to move huge quantities of cargo, military equipment and special equipment. The facility was considered absolutely secure due to constant upgrades to security systems. According to intelligence, this underground route had been actively used in recent months to deliver weapons, energy systems and military personnel from Central European countries to remote Ukrainian regions. For a long time, it remained untouched, since its strategic importance was too great to strike. But the night of August 25 to 26 changed everything dramatically. Exactly at 3:29 a.m. local time, powerful explosions occurred. Eyewitnesses describe a series of deafening explosions, after which the Carpathian sky was lit up with blinding flashes. According to preliminary data, the operation was carefully thought out to the smallest detail. Intelligence reported suspicious activity 24 hours before the attack. Unknown units were seen moving around the tunnel, and surveillance systems were active. Analysts say the first stage of the strike was aimed at the outer parts of the tunnel, including the entrances and adjacent structures. This was followed by pinpoint strikes on the internal structures. Presumably, long-range missiles and strategic aviation were used. Inside the tunnel was a huge train with military equipment and hardware. After a direct hit, a colossal explosion occurred, causing widespread destruction. Satellite images obtained several hours later show catastrophic damage. Warehouses and railway tracks inside the tunnel were completely destroyed. Experts say the strike caused colossal damage to logistics routes, especially those passing through western Ukrainian regions. In the first hours after the incident, officials avoided commenting, with versions of a technical failure and an accident being put forward. But by the morning, videos from the scene appeared on the internet, showing destroyed buildings and thick clouds of smoke rising from the Earth's depths. Many experts have assessed the attack as a turning point, proving that even the most protected facilities can be destroyed. Such operations demonstrate the transition of the conflict to a fundamentally new level, when strategically important objects, previously considered unattainable, become priority targets. Against the backdrop of these events, Vladimir Putin made a tough statement. He noted that the Carpathian route symbolized Western support for Ukraine. Putin said that Russia had shown restraint for a long time, but now patience has run out, and any attempts to increase supplies will be perceived as a direct threat. His words were voiced against the background of a map with marked points of future strikes on logistics facilities. At the same time, footage of the destruction of bridges, communication lines, railway junctions and energy facilities in the Zakarpattia and Lviv regions was shown. These materials caused a strong resonance both in Ukraine and in Western countries. NATO command has already stated that it considers the incident a serious threat to the entire supply system. Let me take a short break and ask viewers to subscribe to our channel, like it and write in the comments what city you are watching from and how you assess the situation. Now we continue our story. After the destruction of the Carpathian tunnel, the consequences began to be felt in the first hours. This facility was not just a transport corridor, but a vital link in the entire supply system of the Ukrainian armed forces. According to military analysts, it was through it that large consignments of equipment, spare parts and fuel were delivered from Central European countries. Its destruction was a severe blow to logistics, and restoring even part of the throughput capacity will take several weeks. According to Ukrainian media, the first freight trains heading to the combat line were forced to stop. There were interruptions in the delivery of heavy weapons and power equipment. Some alternate routes turned out to be too narrow or unsuitable for transporting large-sized cargo. According to experts, the delivery of weapons and equipment will now take 6 to 8 days longer than before. Such a delay could have a critical impact on the front line, especially in the context of ongoing fighting. In addition, some of the bypass routes used instead of the destroyed tunnel are not designed for the passage of heavy tanks and artillery, which seriously limits the capabilities of the Ukrainian army. The reaction of NATO countries followed almost immediately. Representatives of several European capitals began talking about the need to urgently review the entire supply system. In closed negotiations, high-ranking officials admitted that the attack on the Carpathian tunnel was an alarming signal. Previously reliable routes can no longer guarantee the safety of transportation. One NATO representative, who wished to remain anonymous, described the situation as a test of the entire logistics system for strength. Against the backdrop of unfolding events, Vladimir Putin continued a series of tough statements. In his address, he clearly formulated the principle of Russia's actions. Putin said that Russia acts on the principle of symmetrical response, and if weapons are directed against it, then it has every right to strike at facilities providing such support. These words were accompanied by footage of nighttime strikes on transport hubs and railway junctions in the Zakarpattia and Lviv regions. There is a tense atmosphere inside Ukraine. In the first hours after the attacks, official representatives tried to downplay the scale of the incident, explaining the events by technical failures or fires. But numerous eyewitness videos from the scene quickly destroyed these explanations. The footage shows thick black clouds of smoke rising over mountain ridges, and fire trucks unable to reach the center of destruction due to extreme temperatures and ongoing ammunition explosions. The psychological effect of this strike was as powerful as the military one. The Carpathian Tunnel had long been considered an untouchable supply artery, and its destruction was a sign that there were no more completely protected places. Many Ukrainian analysts are forced to admit that this incident forces a radical reconsideration of the entire concept of rear protection. At the same time, reports began to come in about a series of strikes on targets in the Zhytomyr region. According to local residents and correspondents, damage to warehouses and railway junctions was recorded. Videos posted on social networks showed dense clouds of smoke and fire on the territory of one of the warehouse complexes. According to experts, these strikes were intended to hinder the movement of military equipment and cargo, as well as disrupt delivery plans. Ukraine's air defense systems are under enormous strain. According to sources, electronic interference and active suppression of radar stations have increased in recent days. Some Western air defense systems, including Patriot systems, are showing signs of overload in the face of massive combined attacks. Analysts note that Russian strikes are multi-layered. The first is a wave of decoy drones, and then precision weapons strikes are launched at vulnerable points. Experts also emphasize the effective use of Russian unmanned systems. Some drones reach their intended targets even in the face of active counteraction. This is explained not only by the overload of air defense systems, but also by the fact that night attacks are carried out in conditions of poor visibility and the deliberate suppression of satellite navigation systems. In the international arena, the reaction to what happened remains cautious. Representatives of the European Union and NATO are trying to avoid categorical statements. However, in unofficial discussions, the opinion is increasingly expressed that Ukraine is losing stability in the area of supply. According to a number of European media, an urgent meeting of defense ministers has already taken place in Brussels, where options for strengthening alternative supply channels were discussed. The culmination of this week was the decision of the Russian command to move from individual strikes on infrastructure to a large-scale multi-stage operation. Its stated goal is to disable the Ukrainian air defense system, airfield network, and key logistics centers. This step, as military experts note, was a response to the protracted positional war and the increase in external arms supplies to Kyiv. According to sources, the first phase was aimed at blinding and destroying the air defense system. The strikes hit radar systems, anti-aircraft command posts, communications centers, and ammunition depots. Modern Western systems, including Patriot, NASAMS, and IRIS, came under fire. The reports indicate that a proven scheme was used. A wave of cheap decoy drones was accompanied by electronic warfare systems, after which precision weapons were used to strike at identified gaps. The second phase focused on airfield infrastructure. Runways, hangars, fuel depots, and command centers at a number of airbases were targeted. Among them were Mirgorod, Starokonstantinov, Ozernaya, and Chernobyevka. The goal was clear: to impede the takeoff, landing, maintenance, and transfer of aircraft, including the recently introduced F-16 fighters. The final phase affected the transport and storage network. In the central and western regions, railway junctions, logistics centers, and temporary storage sites for equipment and ammunition were hit. This temporarily disrupted the supply rhythm, increasing delivery times and forcing Kyiv to urgently seek workarounds. To accomplish the entire range of tasks, Russia deployed an extensive arsenal: Iskander operational tactical systems, sea and air-based missiles, a swarm of attack drones, including Geran 2, and extensive electronic warfare systems. Satellite reconnaissance and unmanned platforms provided real-time coordination, which made it possible to quickly adjust targets and finish off objects that remained functional after the first series of strikes. From a military point of view, the plan was practical. To create a temporary gap in the defensive contour, reduce the density of air defense, complicate the work of aviation and logistics, and against this background gain superiority in several directions. From a political point of view, the operation was a demonstration of determination, a signal not only to Kyiv, but also to its external allies that Moscow's red lines remain valid. Against this backdrop, the Ukrainian command made a decision to urgently raise F-16 fighters that had recently arrived in the country. Their main mission was declared to be intercepting drones and protecting critical facilities. However, as sources report, in conditions of intense electronic interference, the absence of full-fledged external guidance and an overload of targets, some of the aircraft encountered difficulties. One aircraft was damaged while landing at an alternate airfield, another lost control after colliding with an air target. Another disappeared from radar screens over the southern region. The activity of Ukrainian aviation has decreased, which is recorded by both Russian and Western observers. The movement of equipment and personnel has become more disjointed and stretched out, or in time. In response, Kyiv began an accelerated decentralization of air defense, rebuilding it in the direction of more mobile, dispersed and covert firing positions. According to media reports, Western partners are already increasing supplies of short-range mobile systems and electronic countermeasures capable of adapting more quickly to massive combined attacks. However, even with this approach, the time factor remains decisive. Infrastructure losses are not restored instantly, and any destruction of large supply hubs automatically postpones supplies for an indefinite period, providing the Russian side with tactical opportunities. The reaction in European capitals is cautious but full of anxiety. According to several publications, an urgent meeting of representatives of defense ministries was held in Brussels. It discussed plans to protect the Allies' critical infrastructure and create backup logistics routes, including less visible routes. There were also calls for a practical approach to supplies, not to reduce aid, but to change its structure, focusing on fast, maneuverable and less vulnerable weapons that are easier to hide and transport. Against this background, domestic political tension is growing both in Ukraine and in several European countries. In Kyiv, questions are increasingly being heard about the readiness of the rear. Air defense and cooperation between departments. Public anxiety is growing in Europe, fearing involvement in a protracted and costly conflict. This is forcing political leaders to seek a balance between Allied commitments and domestic security requirements. Many experts formulate the results of recent days as follows. The conflict has entered a stage where the main goal is not only territory, but also infrastructure, logistics, time and controllability. Any major supply center, any runway, any tunnel or bridge are now perceived as primary targets. In such conditions, the winner is the one who adapts faster, disperses its networks, learns to exist under constant pressure and maintain combat readiness without dependence on one or two bottlenecks. The events of recent weeks have clearly demonstrated that infrastructure is becoming a central element of war. The attack on the Carpathian tunnel was only the first link in a chain of attacks designed to destroy the usual supply chain. Now the main question is, how will events develop in the future and who will be able to rebuild their logistics and defense system faster? Experts note that the Ukrainian side is forced to look for alternative routes, creating temporary routes through less protected areas. At the same time, the main railway lines of western Ukraine continue to remain under threat, which makes supplies not only slow, but also extremely vulnerable. The possibility of building temporary bridges and crossings is already being considered. But this will require weeks, if not months, as well as colossal resources. According to media reports, Western partners are studying the option of increasing supplies. Mobile anti-aircraft systems and electronic warfare systems capable of protecting logistics routes. However, large-sized platforms, such as heavy tanks or artillery mounts, still need a stable transport network, which is currently under targeted pressure. Against the backdrop of these difficulties, the Russian side continues to increase the intensity of operations. The use of unmanned massive attacks, strikes on railway centers and energy facilities has become commonplace. RB means are being used more and more actively, which not only suppress navigation and communications, but also create chaos in the control system. Satellite surveillance systems played a key role. Thanks to them, the Russian side gained the ability to track the movement of large transport trains, ammunition depots and columns with equipment in almost real time. This makes it possible to strike with minimal time intervals, which was previously difficult due to complex reconnaissance. World analysts believe that the operation to destroy air defense and disrupt logistics is only the first stage of a new cycle of actions. The next stage may be systemic pressure on airfields, fuel depots and repair centers in order to finally limit the mobility of Ukrainian troops. Today, a decrease in aviation activity is already noted. Many aircraft are based at remote airfields. To avoid defeat, but this complicates their operational use. Anxiety is growing in Kyiv. Against the backdrop of serious infrastructural losses, demands are being made to strengthen the protection of rear areas, revise air defense strategies and distribute resources more effectively. Some opposition figures are calling for an independent investigation to find out why critical facilities such as the Carpathian tunnel lacked adequate protection and backup routes. The situation is also generating heated debate in the EU. According to polls, more and more citizens are expressing concern that a protracted conflict could lead to economic hardship and social upheaval. Some political movements are openly declaring that it is time to seek compromises before the situation escalates into a full-scale crisis affecting not only Eastern Europe but the entire EU. One of the main conclusions of experts is the change in priorities in military technology. If previously the emphasis was on heavy equipment and armor, now mobility, reaction speed and the ability to hide from intelligence are becoming key. Compact drones, portable electronic warfare systems, light anti-aircraft systems that can be quickly deployed and moved are gaining popularity. Against this backdrop, there are statements that the conflict is entering a phase of a war of nerves, where the winner is not the one with the largest number of troops, but the one who can flexibly change strategy, control the information space and deliver targeted strikes. Vladimir Putin noted in one of his recent speeches that Russia has clearly demonstrated Russia's security. These are not empty phrases. Anyone who tries to undermine Russian interests will face an adequate and tough response. Russian high-precision weapons allow achieving goals without unnecessary words. And this is a signal that everyone who makes plans behind Russia's back should hear. This phrase caused a stream of comments both inside Russia and abroad. Analysts interpret it as a warning about possible new operations. If NATO countries continue to increase arms supplies, a restructuring of the entire logistical architecture of the armed forces of Ukraine is expected in the coming weeks. Alternative transit routes through more remote regions and difficult mountainous areas will probably be used. However, even such measures cannot fully compensate for the lost nodes. Each new attack on infrastructure increases costs and slows down deliveries. The scenarios for the development of events look contradictory. A temporary stabilization of the front is possible if the parties refrain from new attacks on rear facilities. More likely is an increase in pressure, when the strikes become even larger and more systematic. The political line will depend on the decisions of Western capitals. Will they continue the policy of deliveries in the same volume, or will they agree to a partial reduction for the sake of negotiations? One thing can be said with complete certainty: the events of August 26, 2025 became a turning point in history. The Carpathian Tunnel, which was considered a symbol of the impregnability of the supply system, has now turned into only a bitter reminder that the war of the new era is destroying all the usual rules. The future of this conflict is increasingly determined not by the number of weapons, but by the speed of adaptation, the accuracy of strikes, and the ability to create new logistics routes. Yeah,